Captain Ji-hoon stood in the command center of the Earth defense ship Aurora, his dark eyes fixed on the glowing screen before him. The message had arrived just minutes ago, but he had read it 7 times already. Each word felt like a punch to his stomach. The Galactic Council had made their final decision about humanity. The holographic text floated in the air, casting blue light across his weathered face 200 years ago. His great-great-grandfather had been among the first humans to make contact with alien species. Back then, everyone thought it would be the beginning of a golden age for Earth humans. Would join the great galactic community and learn from species that had traveled the stars for thousands of years. But now, as Ji-hoon stared at the official decree, he wondered if his ancestor would have been so eager to shake hands with the aliens. If he had known how this story would end, the council had voted humanity was being stripped of all voting rights in galactic affairs. They would no longer be allowed to own businesses on alien worlds. They could not hold positions in government or military leadership. Their colonies would be handed over to other species for proper management. The reason given was always the same: humans were too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous. The other species feared what humans might do if given real power in the galaxy. It did not matter that humans had served faithfully for 2 centuries. It did not matter that they had never started a war or broken a treaty. What mattered was that aliens were afraid of human potential. Jin thought about his own service record. He had commanded ships in the Outer Rim peacekeeping forces for 15 years. He had saved alien colonies from pirate attacks, protected trade routes, and rescued stranded vessels, regardless of what species was aboard. His crew was made up of humans who had volunteered to risk their lives, protecting alien civilians they had never met none of. That mattered. Now, 3 star systems away on the capital world of Nexus Prime Ambassador, Minji was walking through the marble corridors of the council building. Her high-heeled shoes clicked against the polished floor, echoing in the vast hallways. She had just finished 3 days of the most important speeches of her life, trying to convince the galaxy that humanity deserved to remain equal partners in galactic civilization. The council chamber was enormous, with seating for representatives from over 300 different species. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Minji had stood at the center podium, looking up at row after row of alien faces. Some looked like giant insects, others resembled walking trees or floating jellyfish, but all of them looked down at her with the same expression of polite disinterest. She had presented charts showing human contributions to galactic society. Over the past 2 centuries, humans had built 40% of all space stations in the galaxy. They operated 60% of the power plants that kept alien worlds running. They had developed medical treatments that had saved billions of alien lives. They had created art and music that was enjoyed across hundreds of worlds. The aliens listened. They nodded politely. They asked a few questions. Then they dismissed every argument she made. The Valkyrie representative, a tall creature with purple skin and 4 arms, had actually laughed when Minji mentioned human cultural achievements. The sound echoed through the chamber like breaking glass. Other delegates joined in the laughter. Minji felt her face burn with embarrassment and anger, but she kept speaking. She talked about human schools that taught alien children. She mentioned human doctors who had worked for decades in alien hospitals without asking for special treatment. She described human engineers who had volunteered to work in dangerous conditions to keep alien cities running. It was not enough. Nothing was ever enough when it came to proving human worth to the galaxy. Back on Earth, President Hyunwoo sat in his office in Seoul, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The transmission from Nexus Prime had arrived during the night. His advisors had woken him to deliver the news he had been dreading. The council had voted. The motion had passed by a wide margin. Humanity was being reduced to a labor class. Species. Shenwu was 62 years old. He had spent his entire political career working to strengthen the relationship between Earth and the galaxy. He had negotiated trade agreements that brought prosperity to human worlds. He had sent human volunteers to help with disasters on alien planets. He had believed that if humans just worked hard enough and proved themselves valuable enough, the galaxy would eventually accept them as true equals. He had been wrong. The president stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city below. Seoul had grown far beyond its ancient boundaries. Gleaming towers reached toward the sky, connected by bridges and walkways that sparkled in the morning light. Hovercars moved in orderly streams between the buildings below. On the streets, people were beginning their daily routines, going to work or school, unaware that their entire way of life was about to change. Yungwu thought about all the humans living throughout the galaxy. There were human colonies on over 200 worlds, human families who had built lives among alien neighbors, human children who had grown up thinking they were part of something larger than just their own species. All of them would now be second-class citizens in the civilization they had helped build. He picked up his secure communication device and began making calls. By noon, he had contacted the leaders of every human colony and settlement. Representatives from Mars, Venus, the asteroid belt stations, and the furthest human outposts gathered in virtual conference. Their faces appeared on screens around his office, creating a circle of familiar human features in a galaxy that had just rejected them all. The debate was intense, but it did not last long. Some argued for negotiation, for finding a way to work within the new restrictions. Others wanted to fight to use humanity military strength to force the galaxy to reconsider. But most agreed with President Hyunwoo's proposal. If the galaxy did not want humans as partners, then humans would leave entirely. The vote was unanimous. 4 billion humans across 200 worlds and countless space stations agreed. Earth and all human territories would withdraw from the galaxy. They would cancel all treaties, end all agreements, and bring every human home to Sol System. That evening, President Hyunwoo stood before the cameras to address not just Earth, but every human settlement in known space. Behind him, the flag of the Terran Republic hung still in the windless room. His voice was calm and steady, but his words would echo through history today. Humanity formally withdraws from the Galactic Council and all associated agreements. We will no longer participate in a civilization that sees us as inferior. We are coming home, every human. Every ship, every piece of technology we have shared with the galaxy will return to Terran space. The aliens wanted to govern without human input. Now they can try to survive without human help. The announcement went out across subspace communication networks, reaching every corner of the galaxy. Within hours, humans everywhere began the greatest migration in the history of any species. They were going home to a system that had given them life and to a future they would build entirely with their own hands. The galaxy had made its choice. Now it would learn what life was like without the species it had never truly valued until it was far too late. The evacuation began at dawn Earth time, but across the galaxy it felt like the end of the world. Captain Ji-hoon stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as hundreds of human ships appeared on his sensors. Every vessel in the Terran Defense Fleet was responding to the recall order. Ships that had been patrolling alien trade routes for decades suddenly turned around and headed home. The alien commanders at Kepler Station watched in shock as their most reliable military force simply vanished. Admiral Korax, a four-armed Zentari who had worked with humans for 30 years, sent desperate messages begging Ji-hoon to reconsider the pirate attacks in Sector 7 had been getting worse, and without human patrol ships the entire region would fall into chaos. Ji-hoon read the messages but did not reply. His orders were clear. Every human ship, every human crew member was to return to Sol System immediately. No exceptions, no delays. The galaxy had voted to treat humans as second-class citizens, so humans would no longer risk their lives protecting alien interests. On the mining world of Zarian, Prime Engineer Soo-young was in the middle of calibrating the massive fusion reactor that powered half the planet. She had spent 5 years designing and building the revolutionary power system that kept 20 million alien civilians alive. The technology was so advanced that no other species had been able to understand how it worked. When the recall order came through, Soo-young looked at her alien co-workers with sad eyes. These were people she had worked beside for years. They had shared meals together, celebrated birthdays and holidays. They had become friends, but friendship could not overcome the galaxy-wide decision to reduce her species to laborers. The plant supervisor, a nervous Corellian named Blex, rushed into the control room. His tentacles were trembling with panic as he begged Soo-young to stay. The fusion reactor was beyond anything his people could maintain without human expertise. The entire power grid would collapse within months. Soo-young began the shutdown sequence with practiced efficiency. She downloaded all the technical data into secured storage devices that would leave with her every blueprint, every maintenance manual, every piece of knowledge that humans had developed over 5 years of hard work. The aliens could keep the reactor, but they would have to figure out how to run it themselves. The other human engineers followed her lead within. Ours, the most advanced power plant in the galaxy, was running on emergency backup systems. The alien workers stood helplessly as systems they did not understand began displaying warning messages in human script they could not read. 3 systems away, Dr. Young-ho was performing surgery on a Valkyrie diplomat who had been injured in a hover car accident. The patient was suffering from severe brain trauma that would normally be fatal, but human medical technology had advanced far beyond what other species could achieve. The surgical nanobots responding to Young-ho. Gentle commands were repairing damage that alien doctors considered impossible to fix. The operation was delicate, requiring hours of concentration. Young-ho hands moved with the precision that came from 20 years of practice. The monitoring systems showed the patient vital signs slowly improving as the microscopic robots rebuilt damaged neural pathways. Halfway through the procedure, Young-ho replacement arrived. Dr. Thex was the best surgeon the Valkyrie had, but his people medical knowledge was centuries behind. Human techniques. He watched the operation with growing amazement and horror as he realized he had no idea how to continue the procedure if something went wrong. When the surgery was complete and the patient was stable, Young-ho began packing his equipment. The surgical nanobots were human technology, as were the brain scanners and the specialized drugs that had made the operation possible. All of it would be leaving with him. The Valkyrie diplomat woke up just as Young-ho was preparing to go. His eyes were clear and alert, showing that the surgery had been completely successful. He grabbed Young-ho's arm with desperate strength. Please, doctor. You cannot leave. My people need you. We have thousands of patients who can only be helped with your methods. Young-ho gently removed the alien grip. I am sorry, but your government voted to make my species second-class citizens. Perhaps you should have considered the consequences before deciding we were not worthy of equal treatment. The economic impact was immediate and devastating. Merchant Captain Daeyeon had built the largest shipping company in the galaxy. Over 30 years of hard work, his fleet of cargo vessels carried goods between star systems, employing hundreds of thousands of alien workers from dozens of different species. When the recall order came, Daeyeon did not hesitate. He sent the signal to every ship in his fleet: return to Terran space immediately, abandon all current contracts and cargo. The aliens who had been working for him found themselves suddenly unemployed as the ships they had been serving on headed back to human-controlled territory. The Galactic Trade Commission tried to intervene. They offered massive compensation packages and promised Daeyeon a permanent seat on their board of directors. They pointed out that his company carried 40% of all interstellar cargo and that his withdrawal would cause supply shortages across hundreds of worlds. Daeyeon's response was simple and final. My species has been declared unfit for political participation. Your own laws now state that humans cannot hold leadership positions in galactic organizations. I am simply following the rules you created within days. The effects rippled through every corner of galactic civilization. Goods that had been readily available everywhere suddenly became rare and expensive. Food shipments from human agricultural colonies stopped arriving. Medicine developed in human laboratories was no longer being distributed. Raw materials from human mining operations were cut off. On the resort world of Paradise, 7 tourists found themselves stranded as human-operated transport services shut down. The luxury hotels could not function without the human staff who had been running their advanced climate control and entertainment systems. Wealthy aliens who had been vacationing in comfort found themselves dealing with broken elevators, failing air conditioning, and food replicators that no one knew how to repair. Professor Yunji was in her laboratory at the Centauri Institute when the evacuation order arrived. She was working on breakthrough research into dark matter manipulation that promised to revolutionize space travel. The equations covering her office walls represented 5 years of theoretical work that could reduce travel time between star systems from months to days. Her alien colleagues begged her to stay. The research was too important to abandon. They argued it could benefit all species in the galaxy, not just humans. But Yunji was already downloading her files into encrypted storage devices. The galaxy had decided humans were too dangerous to have political rights, so humans would no longer share their most advanced scientific discoveries. As she prepared to leave, Yunji looked around the laboratory that had been her second home. Her alien research partners stood watching helplessly as she packed equipment and deleted files from the Institute computers. They had worked together for years, but now they realized they had never truly understood the complex mathematics and theoretical frameworks that Yunji had developed. Withdrawal was not just about people, it was about knowledge, technology, and expertise that the galaxy had taken for granted. Humans had been the backbone of galactic civilization for 2 centuries. They had taken the jobs that were too difficult, too dangerous, or too important for other species to handle now. As human ships gathered in Sol System preparing for the greatest migration in galactic history, the aliens were discovering just how much they had depended on the species they had never learned to respect. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson that would echo through history. Sometimes the most valuable things are only recognized after they are gone. 3 months had passed since the last human ship left alien space, and the galaxy was dying. Chancellor Minho had been right when he warned the Council that removing humans would have consequences, but even he had not imagined how quickly everything would fall apart. On the industrial world of Corvin Prime, the lights went out at exactly 14:37 local time. The massive power plant that supplied energy to 12 billion alien citizens had been running perfectly for decades under human management, but the quantum resonance chambers that formed the heart of the system were failing, and nobody knew how to fix them. Chief Engineer Borthik stared at the diagnostic screens with growing panic. The readouts were all in human script, which his people had never bothered to learn. The warning messages flashed red and yellow, but they might as well have been written in an ancient dead language. The Corvan had always prided themselves on their superior technology, but now they could not even keep their own lights on. The backup power systems lasted 6 hours. Then the city fell into darkness. 12 billion aliens found themselves trapped in elevators, stuck in underground trains, and sitting in homes that were rapidly growing cold. The proud Corvan Empire, the 3rd largest military power in the galaxy, was being brought to its knees by something as simple as a power failure they could not repair. 2 systems away, Ambassador Kiran of the Velkari Empire was facing his own crisis. A plague had broken out on the Velkari homeworld, spreading through their cities like wildfire. Millions of his people were dying every day, and the number was growing. The disease attacked the Velkari nervous system, causing paralysis and death within hours of infection. The cure existed. Kira knew it did. Human doctors had developed treatments for similar diseases that affected other species, but the Velkari had always claimed their medicine was superior to human techniques. They had refused to allow human medical knowledge to be taught in their universities. Now their pride was costing them everything. Dr. Thex, the best surgeon the Velkari had, was working around the clock trying to save lives, but without human biotechnology and treatment methods, he was helpless. The advanced scanners that could detect the disease in its early stages had been built by humans. The synthetic antibodies that could fight the infection had been created in human laboratories. All of it was Gonakiran watched the death toll climb higher each day. His own daughter had fallen ill, and even with the best care his people could provide, she was dying. The ambassador, who had laughed at human cultural achievements just months before, now found himself desperately wishing for just one human doctor to save his child. The economic collapse was even worse than the infrastructure failures. The Galactic Stock Exchange had lost 70% of its value in 3 months. Entire sectors of the economy had simply vanished when human companies withdrew their investments. Companies that had relied on human expertise found themselves unable to operate. Trader Vexlin had been wealthy beyond imagination just months before. His trading consortium had controlled the flow of rare minerals between star systems, making him one of the richest beings in the galaxy. But his entire operation had depended on human mining expertise and human transport ships. Now his warehouses were empty, his ships were grounded, and his fortune was gone. The rarest materials in the galaxy had been found and extracted by human prospectors working in dangerous conditions that other species avoided. Human miners had developed techniques for working in radioactive environments on high-gravity worlds and in the depths of gas giant atmospheres. they had been willing to take risks that seemed insane to more cautious alien species. Without human mining operations, the supply of crucial materials dried up overnight. Manufacturing plants across the galaxy began shutting down as they ran out of the exotic elements needed for their production lines. Starship construction ground to a halt. Computer production stopped. Even basic electronics became scarce. The agricultural crisis was just as severe. Human colonies had been feeding hundreds of worlds with their advanced farming techniques. They had developed crops that could grow in any environment and had created distribution networks that kept food flowing to even the most remote alien settlements. Now, entire star systems were facing starvation. The aliens had never learned how to manage the complex agricultural systems that humans had built. Automated farms shut down when their control systems failed. Genetically modified crops began dying without the specialized care that human farmers had provided for generations. On the pleasure world of Hedonos 7, millions of aliens faced hunger for the first time in their lives. The planet had been transformed into a paradise by human terraforming technology, but it could not grow enough food to feed its population. Without regular shipments from human agricultural worlds, the citizens found themselves fighting over scraps. The military situation was becoming desperate as well. Human security forces had maintained peace in the outer RIM territories for generations. They had patrolled trade routes, fought off pirate attacks, and kept the shipping lanes safe for civilian traffic, but now they were gone and chaos was spreading through the galaxy like a virus. Pirate Captain Scare could hardly believe his luck. The human patrol ships that had made his life difficult for 20 years had vanished overnight. Entire star systems were now undefended, leaving merchant vessels helpless against his raids. His small fleet of pirates was expanding rapidly as word spread that the galaxy was open for business trade. Routes that had been safe for centuries were now deadly gauntlets. Merchant ships traveled in armed convoys when they traveled at all. Many companies had simply stopped shipping goods rather than risk losing their vessels to pirates. The galaxy was reverting to the lawless frontier it had been before humans brought order to the stars. The cultural impact was perhaps the most unexpected loss. Human art, music, and literature had become incredibly popular throughout the galaxy over the past 2 centuries. Their stories spoke to universal themes of hope, struggle, and triumph that resonated across species barriers. Their music had an emotional depth that alien composers struggled to replicate. Concert halls that had featured human musicians stood empty. The instruments were still there, but nobody could play them with the skill that humans had developed. Theater companies tried to perform human plays, but the alien actors could not capture the emotional range that made the stories come alive. The galaxy was losing not just its workers and protectors, but its soul. On the academic world of Kepler University, Professor Zelfin tried to continue the research that his human colleagues had started, but the mathematics were beyond his understanding. Human scientists had developed theoretical frameworks that were centuries ahead of what other species had achieved. Their departure had not just stopped progress, it had sent galactic science backwards. Research projects that had promised to revolutionize technology were abandoned. Equipment that nobody knew how to operate gathered dust. In empty laboratories, the galaxy was discovering that human intelligence was not just different, it was superior in ways that alien pride had refused to acknowledge. As the crisis deepened across hundreds of worlds, one truth became impossible to ignore. The species that the galaxy had deemed too dangerous to have political power had been the foundation of everything that made galactic civilization possible. Without them, the proud alliance of alien species was crumbling into chaos, and the darkness was spreading faster than anyone had imagined possible. 6 months had passed since humanity left the galaxy, and Chancellor Vorthak was a broken man, the leader of the Zentari Commonwealth paced through the empty halls of the council building where once 300 species had gathered to govern the galaxy. Now barely 50 delegates remained, and most of those represented worlds that were dying. The emergency session had been called to address the growing crisis, but Vorthak knew there were no good options left. Half the member species had already withdrawn from the council. Unable to maintain their civilization without human support, the proud Andorian Confederation had lost 3 entire star systems to infrastructure collapse. The Corvan Empire was facing civil war as different regions blamed each other for the disaster. Delegate Zarian from the Aquarian Republic stood to address the mostly empty chamber. His people had always maintained good relations with humans, and he had opposed the vote to strip them of their rights. But his voice carried no joy as he delivered his report. The situation was beyond desperate, my fellow delegates. He began looking around at the scattered alien faces. The mortality rate across our territories has increased by 400%. In the past month, our hospitals cannot treat diseases that human medicine solved decades ago. Our power grids are failing, our transportation systems are breaking down, and our people are dying. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew the statistics, but hearing them spoken aloud made the reality impossible to ignore. The galaxy that had prided itself on being the most advanced civilization in the universe was collapsing like a house of cards. The foundation had been pulled away and everything was falling down. Chancellor Vorthok took the podium, his forearms trembling with exhaustion. He had not slept properly in weeks as crisis after crisis demanded his attention. The Zentari homeworld was facing power shortages, food riots, and a complete breakdown of social order. His own people were beginning to blame him personally for the human crisis. We must find a solution, he declared, though his voice lacked conviction. Our economies are in ruins, our infrastructure is failing, and our people are suffering. We need to bring the humans back. But even as he spoke the words, Vorthak knew how desperate they sounded. The galaxy had rejected humanity as partners, and now they wanted to beg for their return. The debate that followed was painful to watch. Delegate after delegate stood to blame others for the current situation. The Velkari claimed they had been misled about human nature. The Korven insisted they had only voted to restrict human rights, not to cause their withdrawal. Everyone had excuses, but nobody had solutions. Finally, Delegate Zelenia of the Aquarian Republic volunteered to lead a diplomatic mission to Sol System. Her people had trading relationships with several human colonies, and she hoped that would give her an advantage in negotiations. The other delegates agreed quickly, desperate for any chance to restore contact with humanity. The journey to Sol System took 3 weeks, and Zelenia used the time to prepare her arguments. She studied human culture and history, trying to understand what might convince them to reconsider their decision. She practiced speeches that acknowledged the galaxy mistakes and promised a better future for human alien relations. But when her ship reached the outer edge of Sol System, Zelenia got her first shock at how much things had changed. Massive orbital platforms surrounded the system, bristling with weapons and sensors that were clearly beyond anything the galaxy possessed. The humans had been busy during their isolation, and what they had built was impressive and terrifying. Admiral Kyungmin's voice came over the communication system, cold and professional. State your business in Terran space. The warmth and hospitality that humans had been famous for was gone, replaced by the efficiency of a military force that clearly considered aliens to be potential threats. Selenia tried to sound confident as she replied, I am Ambassador Zelenia of the Aquarian Republic. I come seeking an audience with your leadership. We wish to discuss the possibility of renewed cooperation between humanity and the galactic community. She hoped her diplomatic training would help her navigate this difficult conversation. The response came quickly and without emotion. The Terran Republic does not negotiate with representatives of governments that consider our species to be second-class citizens. You have 30 minutes to leave our space voluntarily, or you will be escorted out by forces. Zelenia felt panic rising in her chest as sleek human warships materialized around her vessel. The technology was clearly advanced beyond anything the galaxy possessed. The weapon signatures her sensors detected were unlike anything in alien databases. These humans had not just been hiding, they had been preparing for war. Please, she transmitted, I represent species that oppose the council decision. My people have always considered humans to be equals. We had nothing to do with the vote that stripped you of your rights. Surely we can find common ground for discussion. Admiral Kyungmin's response was final. We are aware of your voting record, Ambassador Zelenia. The Aquarian Republic abstained from the crucial vote rather than supporting human rights when we needed allies. You chose neutrality. The time for half measures is over. Zelenia's ship was surrounded by a dozen human warships, each one bristling with weapons that could reduce her vessel to atoms in seconds. She had no choice but to order her pilot to retreat. As they limped back toward galactic space, the mission that was supposed to restore communication had ended in complete failure. Back on Earth, President Hyunwoo received the report of the alien diplomatic mission with mixed feelings. Part of him felt sorry for the aliens who were suffering because of their government's decisions. But a larger part of him remembered the years of humiliation and discrimination that humans had endured. The president walked through the gardens of his residence in Seoul, looking out at a city that had been transformed during humanity isolation. New technologies had revolutionized human society, while the galaxy was falling apart. Fusion power had made energy practically free. Transportation systems using gravity manipulation allowed people to travel anywhere on Earth in minutes. Dr. Young-ho had returned to Earth and established the most advanced medical research center in human history, free from the ethical restrictions that alien governments had imposed on human research. His team had made breakthroughs that seemed like magic. Diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia were being cured with treatments that worked at the genetic level. Engineer Su Yang had built fusion reactors that were so efficient they could power entire continents using fuel extracted from seawater. The technology was centuries ahead of anything the galaxy possessed, and humans had no intention of sharing it with species that had rejected them. Captain Ji-hoon commanded a space fleet that was larger and more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human shipyards worked around the clock, building vessels with capabilities that alien scientists could not even imagine. Faster than light communication systems allowed instant contact between Earth and the most distant human colonies. Professor Yoonji had made breakthroughs in theoretical physics that opened up possibilities the galaxy had never dreamed of. Time manipulation, dimensional travel, and energy sources that tapped into the fundamental forces of the universe. All of it was being developed in secret while the aliens struggled to keep their basic infrastructure running. The irony was not lost on President Yunwoo. The galaxy had rejected humans because they were considered too primitive and too dangerous to have political power. But in their isolation, humans had surpassed their former alien neighbors in every field of knowledge. The species that had been dismissed as second-class citizens had become the most advanced civilization in known space. As reports continued to arrive about the galactic crisis, Hyunwoo made a decision that would shape the future. The aliens had made their choice when they voted to reduce humanity to a labor class. They had chosen pride over partnership, fear over friendship. Now they would live with the consequences of that decision. The galaxy wanted humanity to return and save them from the chaos they had created, but humanity had moved beyond the need for alien approval. They had found something far more valuable than membership in a civilization that had never truly accepted them. They had found their own path among the stars, and they would never again depend on the acceptance of those who had failed to see their worth until it was far too late. 1 year after the Great Recall, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Emperor Thaxon stood on the observation deck of his flagship, looking out at what had once been the jewel of the Corvan Empire. The planet below was dark. Half the cities had gone completely without power, and the other half flickered with emergency lighting that barely kept the population alive. Corvan hegemony had been the third most powerful civilization in the galaxy, controlling over 200 star systems and commanding fleets that could conquer entire sectors. But pride had been their downfall when the humans offered to help maintain their infrastructure. The Corvan leaders had refused. They insisted their technology was superior and that they needed no assistance from a primitive species. Now, 3 entire star systems had been abandoned as infrastructure failures cascaded through their territory. Billions of Corvan citizens had become refugees, fleeing dying worlds in overcrowded ships. The proud empire that had once looked down on humanity was begging other species for basic supplies. Thaxon clenched his 6 hands into fists as he watched evacuation ships leave the planet below. Each vessel carried thousands of his people who were abandoning their homes because the Corvan Empire could no longer provide them with electricity, water, or food. The emperor, who had voted to strip humans of their rights, was now watching his own civilization crumbled. The medical crisis had become even worse than the infrastructure collapse. Dr. Young-ho had been the galaxy leading expert on cross-species medicine, developing treatments that worked on the unique biology of dozens of different alien races. His research had saved millions of lives over the decades, but now that knowledge was locked away in human databases on the Valkyrie homeworld. Ambassador Kiran watched helplessly as the plague continued to spread through his people. The death toll had reached 50 million and was climbing every day. The hospitals were overflowing with patients that the doctors could not help. Diseases that had been easily treatable just months before were now death sentences. Her own daughter had been one of the first victims. The ambassador who had laughed at human achievements now knelt beside her grave, wishing desperately that he could take back his vote. The pride that had seemed so important in the council chambers meant nothing when he was burying his child. The Valkyrie had always claimed their medicine was the most advanced in the galaxy, but without human knowledge they were helpless. Medical equipment that they could not repair sat broken in empty hospitals. The synthetic drugs that had kept their people healthy were no longer being produced. Advanced surgical techniques that humans had developed were forgotten. Dr. Dex worked 18-hour days trying to save lives, but he was fighting a losing battle. Without the biotechnology and treatment methods that humans had developed, his people were dying from conditions that should have been minor inconveniences. The Valkyrie Empire was learning that pride was a luxury they could not afford. The security situation had become catastrophic as well. General Wanho had commanded the Terran Defense Forces that maintained order in the Outer Rim territories for generations. Human peacekeepers had protected trade routes and kept criminal organizations from taking control of lawless regions. Now, with the humans gone, pirate fleets roamed freely through space that had been safe for centuries. Entire star systems had been abandoned as criminal organizations moved in to fill the power vacuum. The galaxy was reverting to the chaos that had existed before humans brought order to the frontier. Pirate King Scare had expanded his fleet from a dozen ships to over 300 in just 1 year. The absence of human patrol forces had created opportunities that he had never dreamed possible. His raiders attacked merchant convoys with impunity, knowing that no human warships would come to the rescue. Trade routes that had carried the wealth of the galaxy for 2 centuries were now too dangerous to use. Companies that had transported goods between star systems found their ships being captured or destroyed. The economic networks that connected hundreds of worlds were breaking down as fear replaced commerce. The cultural impact was devastating in ways that nobody had expected. Human art, music, and literature had become integral parts of galactic civilization over the past 2 centuries. Their creativity had inspired alien artists, and their stories had given meaning to countless lives across the galaxy. Concert halls that had featured human musicians stood empty. The alien performers who tried to recreate human compositions lacked the emotional depth that made the music meaningful. Theater companies attempted to stage human plays, but the performances fell flat without the passion that human actors brought to their roles. On the academic world of Sigma Centauri, Professor Zelfin stared at equations that he could not understand. The human scientists who had worked alongside him for decades had been developing theoretical frameworks that were centuries ahead of alien knowledge. Their research had promised breakthroughs in physics that could revolutionize technology, but without human expertise, the research had ground to a halt. Laboratory equipment that nobody knew how to operate gathered dust in empty rooms. The galaxy was discovering that human intelligence was not just different, it was superior in ways that alien pride had refused to acknowledge. The industrial collapse was perhaps the most visible sign of the galaxy decline. Human factories had produced 60% of all manufactured goods, using techniques and technologies that other species had never learned to replicate. When the humans left, entire sectors of industry simply vanished. On Titan 7, factory manager Jinsu had employed over 1 million alien workers in manufacturing complexes that produced everything from starship components to medical devices. His facilities had used revolutionary human techniques that increased productivity by orders of magnitude. When Jinsu shut down operations and returned to Earth, the entire planetary economy collapsed. The aliens who had worked for him found themselves unemployed and unemployable. Their skills were tied to human methods that no other species understood. Unemployment rates soared as businesses closed and industries failed. The refugee crisis was overwhelming the few stable systems that remained. Billions of aliens had been displaced from their homes, fleeing worlds where the infrastructure had failed or the government had collapsed. Refugee camps stretched across entire continents on worlds that could barely support their own populations. Species that had been wealthy and powerful just months before now begged for basic supplies. The proud Andorian Confederation sent diplomatic missions to minor worlds asking for food and medicine. The Zentari Commonwealth offered to trade their most advanced technology for simple fusion reactors that could keep their cities running, but the technology they offered was worthless without human expertise to maintain it. The galaxy was learning that they had not just lost workers when humanity left, they had lost the knowledge and skills that made their entire civilization possible as the crisis deepened and spread to every corner of known space. One truth became undeniable: the species that the galaxy had deemed too dangerous to have political power had been the foundation of everything that made galactic civilization possible. They had been the engineers who kept the lights on, the doctors who saved lives, the peacekeepers who maintained order, and the artists who gave meaning to existence. The aliens had made their choice based on fear and pride. Now they were paying the price for that decision in ways they had never imagined possible. The galaxy was dying, and the species that could save it was no longer willing to help. 2 years had passed since humanity disappeared from the galaxy, and Emperor Thaxon was desperate. The most powerful ruler in known space stood in his private chambers aboard the Imperial flagship, staring at reports that told the same story of decline and collapse. His empire was dying, and only the humans could save it. The Corvan hegemony had lost half its territory to infrastructure failures and refugee crises. The remaining worlds were barely functioning as basic services continued to break down. Thaxon people were starving in cities that had once been the envy of the galaxy. His military commanders reported that entire fleets were grounded because they lacked the parts and expertise needed for maintenance. But Thaxon was still an emperor, and he would not beg. He assembled the largest diplomatic fleet in galactic history, 500 ships, carrying the most impressive display of alien technology and culture that could be arranged. Surely the humans would be impressed by such a show of power and respect. The journey to Sol System took nearly a month because the fleet had to travel slowly to maintain formation. Thaxon used the time to practice his speech. He would offer humanity everything they wanted: full restoration of their council membership, voting rights, and even leadership positions in galactic government, whatever it took to bring them back. When the Imperial fleet reached the edge of Sol System, Thaxon got his first glimpse of what humanity had built during their isolation. The defensive platforms that surrounded the system were massive beyond anything the galaxy had ever constructed. Energy readings suggested weapons that could destroy entire fleets with single shots. Admiral Kyungmin's voice came over the communication channel with the same cold professionalism that had greeted every alien delegation. Emperor Thaxon, you are approaching Terran space with a military fleet. State your intentions immediately. Thaxon tried to project the authority that came with ruling over 100 billion subjects. I come in peace, Admiral. I seek an audience with your president to discuss matters of mutual importance. The fate of the galaxy may depend on our cooperation. The response was swift and without emotion. Your fleet will remain at the system boundary. A single diplomatic shuttle may approach Earth orbit with no more than 10 passengers. Any deviation from these instructions will be considered an act of war. The Emperor, who had expected to be received with ceremony and honors, found himself cramped into a small shuttle with only his most essential advisors. The contrast was humiliating, but Thaxon had no choice. His people were dying, and pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. The space around Earth was unlike anything Thaxon had ever seen. Massive orbital cities housed billions of humans, while construction projects on a scale that defied imagination stretched between planets. The technology on display was clearly centuries ahead of anything the galaxy possessed. President Hyunwoo received the Emperor in a simple conference room aboard a space station. The lack of ceremony was deliberate. Thaxon was used to throne rooms and elaborate protocols, but he found himself sitting across a plain table from a human who looked completely unimpressed by imperial power. Your Majesty, Hyunwoo said with polite formality. What brings you to Terran space? The president's tone was cordial but distant, treating Thaxon like any other foreign dignitary rather than the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. Thaxon swallowed his pride and spoke the words that tasted like poison. I come to offer humanity full restoration of your council membership with complete voting rights and equal representation. We acknowledge that mistakes were made and we wish to correct them. Yunwu smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Your Majesty, you seem to misunderstand our position. We are not interested in rejoining your council. We have built something far better here. The president gestured toward the viewport where the impressive human construction projects were visible through the transparent wall. Thaxon could see orbital factories that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, ships being built that were larger than anything in his own fleet, defensive platforms that bristled with weapons. He could not identify the humans had not been hiding during their isolation. They had been advancing at an incredible pace. We no longer need the galaxy. Approval to thrive. Hyunwoo continued. Your council voted to treat us as second-class citizens because you feared our potential. Well, now you can see what that potential has become. We have surpassed every alien civilization in technology, science, and military power. Thaxon felt desperation rising in his chest. Surely we can find some arrangement that benefits both our peoples. The galaxy is suffering without human expertise. Billions are dying from problems that your people could solve in days. The president's expression hardened. That is a consequence of your choices, Your Majesty. When the council voted to strip us of our rights, you were not thinking about the billions who would suffer. You were thinking about maintaining alien superiority over a species you considered dangerous, but we were wrong. Thaxon said, the admission painful but necessary. We understand now that humanity deserves equal treatment. We are prepared to offer full partnership in galactic government. Thinwu stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the bustling human civilization that filled the Sol system. Full partnership, he repeated with bitter laughter. You offer us equality in a dying civilization. We have built our own future here among the stars. We were born under the human colonies, had not just survived their isolation, they had thrived. Free from the restrictions and bureaucracy that had limited their development, humans had made breakthroughs that seemed impossible. Scientists had developed faster than light communication that made messages instantaneous across any distance. Engineers had created matter transporters that eliminated the need for cargo ships. Medical researchers had conquered diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia, and had begun working on treatments that could extend human lifespans indefinitely. Exploration fleets were mapping new regions of space, discovering resources and worlds that the galaxy had never imagined existed. Your Majesty, Yunwu said, turning back to face the Emperor, we appreciate your offer, but we are no longer interested in being part of a civilization that judges species by their capacity for violence rather than their capacity for good. You made your choice when you decided we're too dangerous to have a voice. Thaxon played his final card. What about the billions who are suffering? What about the worlds that are dying without human help? Surely your conscience demands that you help those in need. The president considered this for a long moment. The suffering is real, he agreed, and it saddens us, but it is the consequence of decisions made by your governments. If your people are truly desperate, they are welcome to immigrate to human space as individuals. We will not turn away refugees, but we will not return to serve a galactic civilization that has proven it cannot value what it has until it is gone. You wanted to govern without human input. Now you must learn to survive without human help. As Thaxon shuttle prepared to depart Earth orbit, the Emperor looked back at the human civilization that had grown far beyond anything the galaxy had achieved. The species that had been dismissed as too primitive for political power had become the most advanced civilization in known space. The journey back to Corvin space took weeks, and every day brought new reports of crisis and collapse. The galactic economy had lost another 10% of its value. 3 more star systems had been abandoned as infrastructure. Failures made them uninhabitable. The refugee crisis was overwhelming the few stable worlds that remained. When Thaxon finally reached his homeworld, he found an empire in its death throes. His advisors brought reports of food riots, civil unrest, and military units that were abandoning their posts. The proud Corvan hegemony was fragmenting as individual worlds declared independence and sought their own solutions to the crisis. The galaxy had made its choice 2 years before when it voted to treat humanity as second-class citizens. The consequences of that decision were now impossible to ignore. Entire civilizations were collapsing. The proud alliance of alien species was fragmenting into chaos and barbarism. Meanwhile, in Sol System, humanity looked to the stars with new purpose. They had learned that they did not need the galaxy approval to thrive. The species that had walked away from galactic civilization had discovered something far more valuable than political power they had found. Their own path among the infinite cosmos of the galaxy had its chance to treat humanity as equals, and had chosen fear over friendship, pride over partnership. Now it would live with the consequences while humanity reached for horizons that the aliens could not even imagine. The species that had been rejected had become something greater than their former neighbors had ever dreamed possible.